Well, welcome, folks. We're glad to have you back with us in this third podcast that we have. We hope you all have enjoyed the first two. In fact, from what we've heard from people who have listened to it, it's been all good things, and so we are glad to hear that you are enjoying this conversation that Pastor Tom and I are having as we dig more into the Bible. The last podcast we did, we covered Genesis 1 through 11, and today's podcast we're going to cover Genesis 12 through 30. That is the next readings for that you guys will be doing next week. And so we hope that you will enjoy this time and that it'll be helpful as much as the first two were as we get into this type of study. Part of the, I think, conversation that I talked about, and one of the things I really enjoyed about this, I think this part was just the beginning here reminded me a lot of pastors. And I say this because this is Abraham's journey. He is being told to pick up where he is familiar with and to go. And he obeys. I mean, he picks up, he goes, and doesn't even know where he's going. At least we have that a little bit. I mean, eventually we find out. But eventually, like we're told by our bishop or DS, pick up your things and move to another location. And we find out eventually, but here he just picks up his things and he just goes. He has no idea where he's going until God says, stop.
There's a wonderful prayer that I think is in Deuteronomy that we will get to, that God gives to the people of Israel as they bring the harvest. They are to pray, "A wandering Aramean was my father." And it is this reference to Abraham as this wandering Aramean. I think the scriptures do call us to a sense of journey. Way later in Exodus, when Jacob comes to see the Pharaoh as an old, Jacob as an old man, the Pharaoh says to him, "How many years have you been alive?" And Jacob very pointedly answers, "The years of my sojourn, of my resting on earth have been my journey." There is this continual sense of journey.
Yes. It's how I see this, and I think, it's part of people have served in the military or people have served other ways in their lives or in other things. People have moved at some point of time. Some knowing immediately where things are going, some were not. This is just, I think what surprised me here, and maybe not surprised, but just is what really stuck to me is the obedience. We don't hear of him questioning. In fact, the scripture just says, he took his wife, his nephew, all their possessions, and all who became members of their household, and they set forth to the land. And eventually we know they arrived in Canaan. But eventually he didn't know that. He didn't know until God told him to stop where he was going to end up being. And so now we know where they're at, and they're going through this time. And you think about the challenges throughout these scriptures that they faced. And it was one of the things that, it sticks out to me is as far as much as they go, it wasn't an easy journey for them. I mean, of all the things they went through very many of the same challenges that people in our own lives go through. And I think when you're reading these things and you're going through things, being able to relate them to our lives and how some of us may have, and some of you who are listening may have gone through similar scenarios from what they went through, and to just think of these challenges of how in life overall. I mean, Abraham and Sarah are both very old people right now when they're getting. I mean, it says he was 75 when he got the call from the Lord to just pick up his stuff and go. I mean, most people when they're 75 now are set. They're going to be where they're going to be, and they're not planning on moving to another destination. But in these situations, this is where they are, and the other part of it is like they're still waiting for descendants. God has promised him these. They sing that if you obey me and you do this, you will have numerous descendants as you go through these promises, these covenants that are made between them. and and I think you can sometimes see the frustration that they face when they keep hearing they're going to have these descendants, but Abraham keeps asking, "But Lord, if we're having, then where, when, what's going on? When is this going to happen?" And it's a matter of God assuring them that the one day will come, that they are going to have everything that they need.
Yeah, we have such an instant culture that we lose sight of the time frame. You know, as you say, Abraham started out on this journey at 75. It was 24 years later when Isaac would be born. He was 99. And so to be prayerfully waiting for 24 years, most of us, I'm lucky if I stay prayerfully waiting for 24 hours, much less 24 years.
I mean, there's so much truth, and I think the thing is in the waiting of how much they did, and it's like you said, I think we are so used that if we don't get something in a decent amount of time, we find a way to try to get it ourselves instead of waiting.
And they did.
Yeah, they did. I know they exactly did.
Both
Yep.
Abram and Sarah
Yep.
tried to make God's promise come true.
Yep.
When we often wonder about the times that Abram describes Sarai as his sister. Part of that is in a means to make the promise come true. Maybe Sarai will become pregnant, and then I would have descendants.
Yep.
Certainly, Sarai giving Abram her servant Hagar is, well, it's not working this way. Maybe I'll make it happen this other way. And yeah, you're absolutely right of the number of times that each of us believes God has promised something, whatever it is. We believe that this is God's desire, and it doesn't seem to be happening. So we give God a hand. Just help God out a little bit. Clearly the Almighty's too busy figuring out the snowstorms in the Northeast, and so I'll take care of this small little thing for God, rather than letting the process of God work out.
Yeah. And we see that happening in there. We see how they did that and continue to do. And, and like you said, you think of our own lives. How many times have we tried to help God in our own midst, trying to do things? And then if we think about it later, after we look back, it's like, man, if I just would have waited. Because a lot of times when we do it ourselves, we don't do it the right way. Or we don't do things the right way. And we can see what happens when people don't do things the right way. We saw it in the scriptures right immediately before this with Adam and Eve and the creation, and in others in the situations when they tried to do things that wasn't part of God's plan. And now we still continue seeing it throughout this, people doing things that were not part of God's plan in this situation.
If I can take us a little bit
absolutely.
over to thinking about Hagar for just a brief minute in our readings from the second day of this week. Hagar becoming pregnant with Ishmael and being sent away from Sarai. I think it's important to notice in chapter 16 when Hagar leaves, first, that God speaks to Hagar. We so often assume the same cultural sexism and issues that we ignore the times that God crosses those boundaries. Here is the Almighty speaking not just to a woman, but an Egyptian woman that was enslaved. And in speaking, gives to her very much the same promises that were given to Abraham. I will increase your offspring, and it will not be countable because of the great number.
Yep.
Your child will be a great nation. I mean, that's a huge promise. I think one of the ways to understand the whole of Scripture, I'll just interject it here as we begin reading through the narrative. One of the ways to understand the Scriptures, is as the reminder that every time people draw a line and say, okay, inside of this line are the people God cares about, outside of the line are the people God doesn't care about. Every time we draw that line, God seems to erase it and declare, nope, them too.
Yep.
Them too.
And that has happened throughout. I mean, you see that in the Bible stories itself.
Exactly.
From people not wanting to include the Gentiles, not wanting to do this. And that line, again, you said, no, God says, nope, those people just as well. And how many times is that same thing done today? I think another thing that really sticks out to me in this is when you think about this, and this is not to make political points or nothing like this, but when you think about this thing, these Abraham, Sarah, and their groups, these are literally immigrants going into countries. They're going into places.
They're refugees.
They're refugees. Yeah, I mean, they're literally moving into and going into areas that are not their parts, but areas that God did. But they're literally traveling into these areas. And how many times, in this sense, that people question and you do things. And to your point about how Abraham would say that Sarah was his sister, and these things, it was more to protect him because that wasn't his land. It wasn't that thing. But and again, like you said, but it also is that going to be a way that helps them for the covenants to be portrayed. And it was another thing that this is what he just decides to do. We'll do this, and they'll see how beautiful you are, and they'll take you in, and they'll protect me. And so it was a matter of another way of doing things that were just not of God's initial plan. But it's just the thing as these people moving in or moving aboard, it was thinking about the refugee part, the immigrant part, how they were moving into different parts. And I think we forget that part when we're into these things. The reason they were doing these things, and a lot of things, was for the protection, trying to get themselves into the better life, getting into the place where God promises them, says, okay, this is where you're going to be, this is what's going to happen. But it's trusting God in all the midst of everything that's going on, that everything's going to will be fine. Right. In the midst of everything that got on, in the midst of everything that they have to deal with, they had to trust God.
Right.
And they had to realize that God was going to be with them in the whole sense. Like God's presence was constantly with them. That promise.
I think in thinking about lessons for us, it includes the importance of hospitality and how crucial that is. When the angels come to visit with Abram and change his name to Abraham, and promise the birth of Isaac, Abraham welcomed them. That's the grounding of that famous verse in Hebrews, do not neglect hospitality, for in so doing some have entertained angels unawares. Yes. That's what that verse is a reference to, is this story here of Abraham welcoming these angels, not knowing they were angels, just knowing they were people wandering in the desert. And wandering in the desert in the ancient world was dangerous. And the horrid story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is again about hospitality. Lot has received these angels and protects them. It's about the importance of understanding all of us, to some measure, are on a sojourn on earth. if I have a place, if you will, and you are wandering, my job is to welcome you and to care for you. Your job is to trust that God has put someone there. And there is that reciprocity that is a part of this hospitality.
Yeah, and exactly right. And thinking about going into that part with the Sodom and Gomorrah things in there, I mean, you see how much even Abraham pleaded with God, like, or bargained, pleaded, whatever you want to call it, to think, he starts with, if there's 50, will you save it? If there's 45, if there's 40, if there's 20, if there's 30, if there's 10. And God says, yes, finally. Even if there's 10, I won't destroy it. But then it comes to that point, as you talked about, when those visitors go there, and Lot pulls them into the house to protect them, because the outside, in that area where they wanted to stay, he knew was not a safe place. And because these were strangers coming into a new thing. They were the immigrants, they're the thing, whatever you want to call them at the time, they're strangers. And as you said, the responsibility was to be hospitable to them, to treat them well. And those in Sodom and Gomorrah were not doing that exactly. It was just the opposite of what they were, and that they tried to almost punish or demean strangers who came into their land, to make them realize that they were in charge, and they were going to be the ones who took control. And when you read about all these things about what's happened, in the stories, it was really a violent way to deal with people, whether it was men, whether it was women. At least my scripture says, where are the men who arrived tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may have sex with them. I mean, this is the CEB, the Common English version. And then, and it was a more of the part of, even in my footnotes, they said it was a more of violence, of a rape almost, safe to speak, which, you don't think about, but it was a way that they controlled people that came into their territory, because it was a way to harm them and eliminate people from outsiders coming in. They didn't want outsiders coming into their new things. They were fine just the way they are. And I thought, in our world today, when you're thinking about this, how much do we hear of people say, we don't want the outsiders in here? But yet, in our very own scriptures, it says that we're supposed to welcome the foreigners, because we also were at one time foreign, those foreigners or those aliens, whatever you want to call them. And so here you have a group of people who don't want the people in there. But then, because of their lack of hospitality, because of their lack of welcoming, I mean, their cities were destroyed.
I think, again, as we begin this journey through the whole of Scripture, part of what we do in these podcasts and in our conversations is to set some of the themes that we're going to keep hearing.
Yep.
And I think there are several themes that really bubble up from this Sodom and Gomorrah narrative. One of them is this understanding of, if you will, two views of life. Augustine talked about the city of the earth and the city of God, or if you want to talk about worldly values and faithful values, however you want to think of it, two different ways of understanding. And what you're saying is, as I hear you, is that Sodom and Gomorrah have these city of earth worldly values of power and domination and violence, and Lot is representing the heavenly values of hospitality and welcome, and that's what is coming into conflict here. And we need to be aware that the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah are portrayed as being outside the people of faith by their own actions. One of the other themes that I think needs to be lifted up from the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative is the importance of praying.
Mm.
You know, you talked about Abraham's kind of
Mm-hmm.
negotiation with the Almighty, a concept that most of us kind of shy away from, even if we do actually negotiate with God frequently. The Jewish mystics make an interesting distinction between Abraham and the way he dealt with Sodom and Gomorrah, and Noah and the way he dealt with the flood.
Mm.
They tell a story, not in the scriptures, not a part of our canon, but they imagine the moment that Noah comes out of the ark and looks around and sees all the destruction. And in doing so, Noah says, God, how could you destroy everything that you have made? How could you do all of this? And the Almighty replies, now you ask me? I stayed with you for 2 days, waiting for you to request your people. In contrast, God says to Abraham, I'm going to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham didn't live in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he may not have even known that Lot was in Sodom and Gomorrah, so he wasn't necessarily pleading for his own blood, if you will. He was pleading for strangers, and he negotiated God down to 10.
Yeah.
There is within the call of Scripture a need for us as people of faith to pray for our generation.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever we see going on, to be the people that fall on our knees and pray that protection, even for those that seem to be doing what we think is wrong.
Yes, that's a really, really good point. And thinking of that even in our own sites, in our own things, in the way, even the things in our world today, if we thought more of that, of praying for those who are not in the same position of where we're at, or as he said, like, not that we're going to bargain or plead with God, but in your prayers, even pleading and praying for those to have a different way of thought or a different way of things, who are not showing the hospitality or the ways of the heavenly ways, as we said, and are more focused on that worldly way.